Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Joining us on the line now is J. Randy Taraborrelli. He's the acclaimed author of numerous New York Times bestsellers about the Kennedys, some of which have been adapted for television and some he's in the process of adapting. His new book, JFK, Public, Private, Secret, includes groundbreaking revelations that include previously unreported affairs, the truth about his relationship with Marilyn Monroe, and the truth and the role of the mafia in his rise to power. Welcome to the show, Randy.
It's nice to be here. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Great to have you with us. So with all these amazing books that you've written about the Kennedys over the years and all the research that you've done, how is it that you're still finding new stuff about them? That's impressive.
Thank you. You know, when I started this book, I said to myself, look, if I can't break new ground, I'm just not going to do it. I have on my bookshelf in my office about 100 Kennedy biographies on JFK, and so that's a bit intimidating, you know. But I found as I was going along the process that the material that I was uncovering was brand new. And I was interviewing people who were in their 90s and in their hundreds, which was so fascinating for me, you know, to be able to talk to people who were actually there at the time. My oldest source was 105.
Wow.
And she was great. She was just great. And, you know, those people had never talked before. And they wanted to get their stories on the record before it was too late. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I was able to break new ground, was because we were able to talk to people who had never talked before, but who felt that the clock was ticking and that now was the time to tell their stories.
Yeah, fantastic. So the people that you spoke to, particularly the older people who were there at the time, were they friends or colleagues, or can you tell us that?
Well, one of the women that I talked to, who was 102 years old when I interviewed her, was hired by JFK's father, Joe Kennedy, in the 1940s to be his secretary. And what she didn't realize when she got the job was that she was also going to be his companion and live in the house with him and his wife, Rose Kennedy, JFK's mother, and actually be employed, you know, to be Joe Kennedy's lover. And she had never told, her name was Janet. She had never told her story before. And she told me this incredible story of how she lived with Joe Kennedy and the Kennedys for 10 years. That she actually grew to be very close to the family. Rose Kennedy admired her very much, and they had this very sort of unconventional three-way marriage that you would never think would be possible in the 1950s, you know, but it happened. And then after she left Joe Kennedy, she went to work for JFK in the White House as his secretary in the Oval Office. But while she was working there, you know, she was looking for her husband and she wanted to get married and have children. But everybody at the White House knew that she had previously been with Joe Kennedy, the president's father, and nobody wanted to go near her. They were afraid of her. And so JFK pulled her aside one day and he said, look, you're never going to find a husband here. I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to send you to Paris, where you can work for the ambassador to France. And maybe over there you'll have more success in finding a husband. And he did that. And she did go to Paris, and that's where she met her husband, and she had her 2 children. So it's an incredible story. And her name is Janet DeRose, and it's in the book. And I just think that those kinds of stories are what really made this book come to life for me.
Yeah, absolutely. What an incredible story. So Rose knew that Janet was sleeping with her husband and was okay about it. That was the arrangement.
That was the arrangement. She not only knew it, but she endorsed it. You know, she asked Joe Kennedy, what is it that I get out of this deal? And his answer to her was freedom. And she said, fine, because that's really what she wanted. She would have probably divorced him if they weren't so staunchly Catholic. She felt trapped in a marriage that was loveless for her. And so, she looked at Janet as an empowering situation in her life, because Janet allowed her to have the freedom to travel and to not be stuck with this guy that she really didn't want to be with, And I printed in the book a letter that Rose sent to Janet when Janet decided that she was going to leave their employ. And the letter is so enlightening, because Rose says basically, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate what you've done for us in the last 10 years. So it's such an interesting story to me, and I just loved it so much. And Janet she just died in March at 102 years old. And I was so sorry that she wasn't able to get a copy of this book, because it came out in July. Oh. And I really, really wanted her to have a copy. It's funny, because I thought, well, you know what? She's lived 102 years. She'll live until July, right? and she didn't make it. Her son called me and told me, I'm so sorry to tell you that Janet passed away in her sleep, but she had a wonderful life, and she was very, very, accomplished, and she did amazing things. And I was able to tell her story for the first time in this book.
Oh, amazing. There's another story that I read in a kind of article that you wrote in the Daily Mail in the UK, talking about Joan Lundberg, who was somebody who JFK had quite a long and, very explicit affair with, shall we say.
Yes, I had never known about this before, and one of the things I decided when I started this book was that this is not going to be a recitation of all of JFK's affairs. I didn't want to, do an A through Z accounting of all the women that he had relationships with, because I felt like that had been done, and that it didn't say anything about him. And I told my research team, we need to find people, who actually influenced him. We don't want just women that he had one night stands with. We want women who actually meant something in his life. And Joan Lundberg was that woman for me in this book. She had never told her story, and her family agreed to let me have access to her diaries and her date books and all of her memories of her relationship with JFK. And the relationship happened at a time in his life when he really needed somebody like Joan, because he was on the outs with Jackie and with her family and with his family. And he had nobody, to talk to. And it's hard to imagine that this was the case. He was a senator at that time. It was 1956. But he really felt ostracized, and he turned to Joan, and they had a 3-year-long affair, and she acted very much like a therapist in his life. And she actually straightened him out a great deal. And I think it's an amazing story. And wow, I'm really happy to be able to tell it for the first time.
Yeah. you say he had no one to talk to, didn't their affair start when shortly before Jackie gave birth?
Well, you're right. Actually, the affair started. He met her before Jackie gave birth, and then he went on a cruise. Jackie gave birth, and unfortunately, the baby was stillborn. Mm. And JFK did not come back to be with Jackie at her side after this terrible thing occurred. And he waited a week to go back to her, and everybody in his life was so outraged by that. And by his just sort of lack of empathy. It was just really striking to people that he just had this sort of emptiness within him. And Jackie's mother, Janet, was so upset with him that she wouldn't even allow him to sleep in the main house at Hammersmith. He had to sleep upstairs in the servants' quarters over the garage. And he's a senator, he's JFK, but they were like, we really don't even want you in our family anymore. So he was so filled with guilt and sorry about the way he had treated his wife, that he went to Los Angeles to get away from all of it. And then that's when he began his affair with Joan.
To create more guilt.
Well, it's a funny thing with men like that, right? They just make things worse.
Yeah.
And, but the thing that happened with Joan, as I wrote in the book, was over a period of 3 years, they actually began sort of a therapeutic relationship where he began to open up to her in ways he had never opened up to anybody else. And he began to see different aspects of his own personality. And he became, as a result of his relationship with Joan, a better man. And then he was going back to Jackie, and he was a better husband. And as I wrote in the book, there was a point about 3 years in when Joan realized that he was falling in love with his wife, which is something that she never really anticipated, because she was in love with him and she wanted to be with him one day. But as a result of her sort of intervention, he was beginning to fall in love with his wife, and they were having a better marriage. And so it was a real twist, was sort of a plot twist that Joan didn't see coming, but did happen.
Yeah. And according to Joan, presumably in her diaries, she said that JFK had basically said to her that he and Jackie were kind of the product of an arranged marriage.
Yes, very early on in one of their first conversations, when they first started their relationship, that's what he told her. He said, it's not bad, it's not good, but it's not bad. And it definitely was an arranged marriage. I mean, they weren't in love with each other. When Jackie's mother, Janet, asked Jackie, are you in love with him? Jackie's response was, I enjoy him, which wasn't quite the same as saying I love him, But that's what this story really is about. I mean, as you read the book, you see the evolution of their relationship, and by the time the story ends, they are in love with each other. That they went through the fires of a very challenging marriage and came out on the other side at the 10-year mark as truly being a loving married couple, so much so that at the end of the book, Janet, Jackie's mom, and Jackie were planning a renewal vow ceremony for JFK and Jackie, which would have been on their 11th anniversary in 1964. And it's so interesting that while they were planning this, Janet, the mother, said to Jackie, my gosh, here we are doing this thing. After everything that you've been through with this guy, you really, really do love him, don't you? And Jackie's response was, I really do. She said, but it's we who made him. Right? That's what she said. It's we who made him. And I thought, wow, what an amazing thing to say. It was like her way of taking accountability for her marriage. Yeah. It wasn't just him. It was them allowing him to have these. Jackie knew about Joan. Jackie said he didn't have to lie to me about Joan. I was lying to myself. Right? Mm-hmm. So what basically Jackie was saying in that moment was that, we allowed him to do all of these things because, either we were sort of enchanted by him, or we were swept away by his charisma, or we were influenced by his power. For one reason or another, JFK got away with a lot. And you don't get away with a lot unless people allow you to, right? Yeah. And that's what Jackie was saying in that moment. It's we who made him.
Yeah, interesting. And you also talk about the truth about his relationship with Marilyn Monroe. Again, so much has been written about this before, both by yourself and plenty of other authors. How were you able to find out more information on that subject?
Well, again, I didn't even want to write about Marilyn unless I could bring something new to it. And luckily for me, I was able to interview a woman named Pat Newcomb, who was 95 when I interviewed her. She's 96 now. We just talked recently. And she was Marilyn Monroe's publicist at that time and also her best friend. And she really gave me a lot of insight into what was going on at that time with Marilyn and JFK and Bobby. And I came away with the impression that there was no affair at all between Marilyn and JFK. But I totally understand why historically we believe that there had been. And the reason for it, as explained by Pat, is that Marilyn had a lot of emotional problems, and she was not the best narrator of her own life. And she told many people in her life that she was having an affair with JFK. And these people then told reporters like me over the course of decades that Marilyn told me this and Marilyn told me that. And it just never occurred to them that Marilyn was lying to them, right? And then they in turn inadvertently were lying to guys like me without even realizing it.
Yeah.
You know? And so as I wrote in the book, we can't prove for sure that Marilyn and JFK, did not have an affair because nobody was following them around. I will say this, though. The Secret Service was following JFK around, and there's just no evidence from any Secret Service agent that he was with Marilyn. I truly don't think that there ever was an affair. And that's kind of the hill that I've decided to die on with this book, because I'm not convinced that there was. But as I wrote in the book, I'm not all knowing, right? I can't know everything that was going on in everybody's private moments, but we don't have enough evidence right now to support that Marilyn and JFK were ever having an affair.
Yeah. Wow. And also, what did you find out about the role of the mafia in his rise to power?
Well, again, there lots of books have been written about the mafia and the mob and, the JFK's rise to power. And, and I've read them all and I've interviewed, listen, I wrote about Frank Sinatra, so I've interviewed a lot of mobsters, right? And so I know mobsters pretty well. I'm from the East Coast. I'm Italian American, I've come across quite a few mobsters in my lifetime. I just don't believe that there was. I think this. JFK and Joe Kennedy had enough power and influence that they didn't need the mob. They approached Frank Sinatra with the idea of getting mobster intervention in order to cover all their bases. But then they realized they didn't need it. However, in a case very much like the Marilyn story, Frank Sinatra went around and told people that the Kennedys approached me and asked me to approach the mob, and I did. Frank did approach the mob. But in the end, the mob didn't do anything. And so, that is sort of the way that story worked out. Again, we have Frank Sinatra's word to reporters, but he didn't realize that his request was not honored, and so you only got half the story for most of the last 50 years, and I like to think I've given you the other half.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you start putting a book like this together, it must be difficult to work out the order of it all. Have you written it chronologically or subject wise?
Well, as I wrote in the book, in the introduction, I didn't want this to be sort of a moment by moment history of JFK's political career. That's not what interested me. What interested me with this book was how did the politics affect his family, and how did the family affect the politics? And not only his family, but Jackie's family, because that's sort of the hidden secret of JFK is Jackie's side of the family. People don't realize JFK had a mother-in-law, not just a mother. Right? JFK had brothers-in-law. Jackie had a brother. Jackie had his two sisters, and Jackie had a mom, and Jackie's mom was his mother-in-law, right? Jackie's stepfather was his father-in-law. So I wanted to write about those people, right? And I wanted to tell the story of these two families. And how complicated it is when your son-in-law is the president of the United States, but you're mad at him because he's cheating on your daughter, right?
Yes.
How do you square that? Like when the president of the United States wants to spend the weekend at your house, do you turn him down because he's cheating on your daughter? Or or are you swept away by the fact that, my God, the president wants to spend the weekend, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Definitely.
And Jackie's mom used to say about JFK, so many women, so little sense, right? That was her. But she really grew to love him. And as you see in the book, their relationship was very complicated, but very, very emotional. And he used to call her Wellspring. That was his nickname for her, Wellspring, because as he explained it, from where all good things spring. In other words, he just felt like she was such a good person. And she was so flattered by that nickname, Wellspring, and it was very much like him, to ingratiate himself with these people because he had such a charming personality and he was essentially a good man, and so I love that kind of complicated person. But to answer your question, I write books. I always have the reader in mind when I'm writing a book, and as I'm writing, I always have in mind, is this interesting or is this boring? Right? Is this like a bunch of policy talk that is probably true, but is going to bore the heck out of my reader? Or what can I do to make this thing come to life? And I think that what really surprised people about JFK Public-Private Secret was that it's not the same old story. Yeah. And that was really my goal.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, if people want to get a copy of JFK Public-Private Secret, it's available now on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by J. Randy Taraborrelli, who we've been chatting with. Randy, thanks so much for joining us. Great to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me.